and welcome to Season 4, Episode 16 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. We have over 135 episodes recorded and available on YouTube. So if you miss out because of load shedding or your Tuesday nights have become busy, never fear, you can always catch up later. Tonight, we are privileged to be joined by presenters from Cornell University, the Macaulay Library in the US, who'll be talking about bird sound. Webster, who's the director of the Macaulay Library. He wears two hats at the lab. Firstly, he's the director of the Macaulay Library, which is a media collection dedicated to capturing and preserving recordings that capture the behaviors of wild birds and other animals. Secondly, Mike is a professor in Cornell University's Department of Neurobiology and Behavior. In this role, he does research on and also teaches classes about animal communication and behavior. Through his research and teaching, he aims for a better understanding of how and why animals communicate with each other, and also what accounts for the evolution of the incredible diversity of signals that we see in nature. Then we're also joined by Cullen Hanks, who is a project leader at the library and helps coordinate media collection, the eBird project, and Merlin Bird ID. As a teenager, Cullen connected with the birding community, which supported his interest in nature and led to a career focused on birds and conservation. His primary role is to help to support the network of partners that use eBird and Merlin to engage communities in birds and collect useful data for research and conservation. We are also joined by Ali Smith, also from Cornell, who will be online to answer any questions at the end. So Mike and Cullen, please do switch on your videos and say hello to everyone, and Ali as well, just so people know who you are. And I think, Mike, you are going to present first, if I'm correct.
You are correct. Yes, very. Thank you.
So you can.
Okay. Sure. I just first want to say thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. I guess my only regret is that I'm not actually there in South Africa to meet you all and to see some of the awesome birds in your backyard. But I guess the silver lining is we have people from all over the globe here right now. And so that's really exciting to me that we're able to speak and reach out and interact with so many of you at once. I guess that's the magic of Zoom. So I'll start my screen sharing here. Something about the Macaulay Library and what it is. As Christina mentioned, the Macaulay Library is a media collection, so we consider ourselves to be a research collection with, but instead of the skins and bones that you find in most media collection, or most research collections, our specimens are recordings, are audio recordings, videos, and photos that capture the behavior of animals, particularly birds. And it's really a resource that can be used by researchers doing all sorts of different kinds of projects in ecology, evolution, animal behavior, conservation science. And it's also a resource for people who are just interested in birds in general. So this screenshot here is of a search I did just to look at the media we have from South Africa. And you can see we have actually quite a number of photos, audio recordings, video recordings from your country, and those are there for you to use and take advantage of for your own education and or research. And I think Cullen will be saying a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And so what we'd like to do today, we divided our talk into sort of like 4 different parts. I'll be talking about taking the first 2 parts, which is really talking a bit about the research and the science of understanding birdsong and bird communication signals. And then I'll switch it over to Cullen for the second 2 parts. And so we'll start by a section I call seeing sound, because if you want to do science, if you want to do research on sounds, on bird sounds or elephant sounds or what have you, the first thing you need to be able to do is measure those sounds. And with a tarsus or a wing or something like that, it's easy to measure with a ruler or calipers or something along those lines. But with sounds, it's a little bit more difficult, right? It's hard to put a ruler up to a bird signal. And so the first step in doing science with acoustic sounds is to turn it into something that can be measured. And so the way that's normally done is to turn a sound, an acoustic signal, into something that we call a spectrogram or a sonogram. So here's a song sparrow. It's a common bird in my backyard here in Ithaca, New York. This is a spectrogram of a song sparrow's song. In the spectrogram, the y-axis is frequency or pitch, and the x-axis is time. So this is basically showing you how the bird's song changes in pitch over the course of its singing that song. And if you look at that song, you can see that there are some blue blobs that are kind of high in frequency, some blue blobs that are low, some very rapid notes that come in rapid succession. We call it trill. And so I look at this, and because I'm used to looking at these, I can see that this song is basically high, low, high, trill, buzz, whir. And so if you don't see that yourself, this is what the bird sounds like. So high, low, high, trill, buzz, whir, right? And I'll slow it down now and see if you can pick it out and practice using your eyes and your ears at the same time. So I think that gives a little bit deeper appreciation of what the bird's able to do with its voice. So high, low, trill, buzz, whir, right? That's the song sparrow for you. And I just want to play a few more of these because they're kind of fun to listen to. They're fun to watch at the same time. And as I was saying before, it's great to train your eyes and your ears to work together. So this is a spectrogram. This is a wood thrush, another common bird. Another common bird up here. Beautiful flute-like song with a bit of a trill at the end. And I think you can really appreciate it even better if I slow down that song. And this is a little bit more what the birds hear. Birds have very good temporal acuity, so they can tell song notes apart. So notes that sort of get blurred together in our ears because we humans don't have very good temporal acuity, the birds can distinguish those better. It's also kind of fun when you slow it down, it becomes very otherworldly. Here's another one. So that is a song of a crested oripendula, which is, oripendulas have a soft spot in my heart because I used to do research on them, and they make absolutely amazing vocalizations. And so just to appreciate how amazing that vocalization is, I'm going to slow that one down also so you can hear the fine details. I mean, I hear that and all I can think of is how does that bird make that sound? It sounds like somebody plucking down the strings of a harp. What is the mechanism responsible for a sound like that? Here's another one. And so that's a Pacific wren, a common wren in the Western United States. And if we slow that one down, you can really appreciate it. It's like jazz improvisation, what this bird is doing with its voice. So I don't know about you, but that absolutely astounds me. That is like acoustic acrobatics that little tiny bird is able to do with its voice. And so that, of course, brings us to that question I posed a second ago, which is, how do these animals make these incredible sounds? And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about research on birdsong, how it's done, and what we've learned through some of that research. But of course, I only have a few minutes here, and so this is just going to be a very much a thumbnail sketch. Every year there are hundreds, if not thousands, of papers that are published on birds singing, how they sing and why they sing. And so I'm just going to do a little sliver here just for fun. And if you have any questions and want to dig a little deeper, I'm happy to entertain those questions at the end. But to talk about research on birdsong, I want to take sort of a historical perspective and go back to Arthur Allen, who's actually the person who started the Cornell Lab of Ornithology back in the early 1900s. Arthur Allen was approached by some folks here who were actually in the early days of the movie making industry. And they were experimenting with this new technology called talkie movies, so sound synced movies. And they wanted to see if they could test push the mechanics of talkie movies to its limit. And so they approached Arthur Allen and asked, do you think we could actually film birds singing? And Arthur Allen had no idea. He had never done it before, but they went down to a city park here in Ithaca, New York, and they filmed 3 different birds singing that day. And here's one of those songs. One of the birds that they sang or they recorded was a grosbeak. And this, what I'm about to play for you, is one of the first, if not the first, audio recordings ever made of a bird singing.
LNS catalog number 16968.
So they did this early experiment to see if they could actually record birds singing. It was remarkably successful. And a light bulb went on over Arthur Allen's head as he realized that suddenly he had this tool, a tool in his hands that he could use to do research about birds. And he knew that he could film birds, he could record birds, and he started to think about what sorts of science can we do with these recordings. So I don't know if you can hear that very well. It's a low pitched sound, and if your speakers aren't quite right, you may not be hearing it, but what you're hearing is the display, the acoustic display of a bird. And specifically, that bird is a ruffed grouse. It's another bird that's fairly common up here in this part of the northeastern United States. And back in the early 1900s, there was a raging debate about how this bird actually made the sound that it's producing, because it's very low pitched. It sounds like drumming. Nobody really knew how they did it. And in fact, the males, when they're displaying, stand on a fallen log. And so one prevailing theory is that the males were actually making the sound with their feet by drumming their feet up and down on the log like a drum. But there are other ideas out there. And so Arthur Allen and his student, Peter Paul Kellogg, who's shown in this video here, decided that they would try to tackle this question with film and audio recording. And so they set up a microphone near a male display log. They put a camera on the male. And because it was the early 1900s, they didn't have any like remote control device or anything like that. Peter Paul Kellogg had to actually lay next to the log, and they covered him with leaves and other debris so he'd be hidden. And when the male started his display at dawn, Kellogg had to sneak his finger out onto the recorder and hit record so that he could capture the sounds as well as the video of this male displaying. And what they found is what you see here. This is a male beating his wings against his chest. He's actually compressing air very rapidly against his chest, the same way that as when we snap our fingers. And so it's a percussive sound, but the bird is doing it on its own body. And that was the very first research project that was ever done that used media, video, or at the time film and audio recordings to answer scientific question. Using those media, they uncovered how it is that these males make this remarkable sound. And so fast forward now several decades to the early 2000s, and I want to tell you another quick story about another research project that did kind of the same thing with more modern approaches to understand how another bird makes its sound. So here, now we're going to go down to South America. We're going to Ecuador. to the Milk Bay Reserve. And one of the birds that's common down there is this thing called the club-winged manakin. And the sound you're hearing is the club-winged manakin male's display. It's a chick-whir kind of call. And if you look at the spectrogram of this call, you can see there's a tick and then a ting. The ting is this long drawn out thing that's even frequency with several different harmonics. The fundamental frequency, or the lowest frequency, is about 1.5 kilohertz. So the question is, how do these birds make this cool call? And so Kim Bostwick, who's the researcher who did this work, went down to Ecuador, and she filmed with Tim Lehman some of these males making these sounds. Now the audio is not real good in this video, but you can see the male displaying. And if you look closely, what you see is when he's making his call, he's actually not opening his mouth. His mouth is not being used for that call, but every time he makes a call, he raises his wings behind his back and is doing something with those wings, but it's not clear what it is that he's doing. So Kim got a high-speed camera so she could film one of these males displaying at very high speed and then play it back so it slows the whole action down. And this is what she saw. This black and white image on the right is the video that Kim captured. So he's now about to do the ting. So you can see what he's doing is he's raising those wings up behind his back, and he's beating them together very, very rapidly. He's beating them together at about 107 beats per second. That's actually faster than a hummingbird beats its wings when it's flying. And if you look at the frequency of those wing beats and divide it into the pitch of that call, 1.5 kilohertz, what you find is that there has to be about 7 notes per wing beat. And the way the bird generates those 7 notes is every time it beats its wings together, modified secondary feathers in its wing are rubbing against each other like this. And those feathers are stridulating. They have teeth and barbs on them. And when they rub against each other, they produce that note. So it's this is a mechanical sound. It's not, the bird's not making the sound with its throat, with its voice, it's using its wings. But of course, most birds actually sing with their mouth, right? They vocalize, like this sparrow. So we can also ask the question, well, how do birds vocalize? What's the apparatus that allows them to make those amazing vocalization? And it turns out the birds have a voice box, much as we do, but their voice box is more complex. They have a syrinx rather than a larynx, shown in this cartoon. And the syrinx is a really amazing organ in the throat of a bird. It's much like our voice box, except for it's doubled. It has one side that goes to one lung, the other side goes to the other lung. And so it actually has 2 sets of vocal cords, one on the left and one on the right, that it uses to make its vocalizations. This allows birds to make very complex calls. So you could take this bird, for example. This is a brown-headed cowbird, another North American species. This is the spectrogram of its sound, and you can see there's sort of a low-pitched warble and then like 2 or 3 high-pitched notes at the end. And this is what a cowbird sounds like. So at normal speed. And through some very ingenious physiological work, a researcher discovered that these different notes that are made by this cowbird are coming from different sides of its syrinx. So some of the sounds are coming from the left side, some of the sounds are coming from the right side. And on the sonogram, the spectrogram, I've now labeled them with an L or an R for whether it comes from the left or the right side of the syrinx. And you can see what the bird's doing is alternating between the 2 sides of its syrinx to make that complicated warbling sound. So here again is what it sounds like at normal speed. And here it is slowed way down. So you can actually hear how it's switching back and forth between the left and the right sound to make that complex warble. So that's just a little taste of some of the research that's been done on how birds sing, whether they use their voice box to sing or mechanical sounds like their wings. But now I want to switch gears just really quickly and talk a little bit about why they sing. And to talk about research on why birds sing, I want to introduce another very standard experimental approach that's used by a lot of researchers, which is the playback experiment. So here's a playback experiment we did in one of my research projects. So I study fairy wrens in Australia as one of my main research projects. And one of the birds we study is something called the redback fairy wren. And what you're looking at in this picture is a model redbacked wren. It's just a hunk of modeling clay with feathers attached to it. So it looks vaguely bird-like. And what we did is we put out this fake bird on a branch, and underneath it had a speaker. And from that speaker, we could play the local bird song of that redback fairy wren, or we could play some other song, a different species, a different population of the same species, that sort of thing. And I won't show any graphs or data or anything like that. I just want to show you a video of the response of the male on whose territory we did this playback experiment. So here we're doing the playback. So that's the local fairy wren song that you just heard. And here comes the local male. And he is extremely unhappy that this fake bird is on his territory singing a song. So he attacks it viciously. And you'll see that we even switched the model out. You can use different models. You can put out a model that doesn't even look like the same species. It's blue and white. And as long as they hear that local song, they go bananas. They go crazy and attack the model. And this is just, one bit of evidence out of many different experiments that have been done that show that one of the main functions of birdsong is that males use birdsong to defend their territories. So the song is a signal to other males that they should stay away, right? And so other experiments have been done to show that the second main function of birdsong, at least as we've understood it for the last few decades, is one function is male-male interactions to defend territories. The other main function is to talk to females and attract mates. So males are mostly singing, we think, based on the research that's been done, to defend a territory and attract females. But in just the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, we've started to become aware of the fact that we're missing a big part of the puzzle. And the reason we're missing and understanding that we're missing a big part of the puzzle is because in many, many species, it's not just males that sing. In a lot of species, females also sing. And so here, for example, is the Venezuelan troupial, which is a type of New World oriole. And but in troupials, males sing, and that's the spectrogram on the top, the blue spectrogram. The spectrogram on the bottom, the red spectrogram, is a female song. So in this species, both males and females sing. So here's the male song. And here's the female song. So they're both really amazing songs, but what's especially cool about these birds is the males and females usually sing together in a duet. And this is what the duet looks like in a spectrogram, and this is what it sounds like. I just love that. That is amazing. Here's another New World wren, black-bellied wren, and this is what a duet sounds for black-bellied wrens. And so the fact that females sing in at least some species, it's not new. People have known that some females of some species sing. But I think what we've really become aware of in the last 10 years is just how common female song is. And so this phylogenetic tree here, this family tree for songbirds, just shows a bunch of species, how they're related to each other. You can ignore the details. The important point here is at the end of the branch, at the end of each branch is a colored circle. And if that circle is red, it means that both females and males sing. And if it's blue, it means that only males sing. And if you squint and can see that image very well, you see that most of the circles are red. And in fact, about 3/4 of species of bird, females as well as males sing. And it's now clear that the ancestral state, so the earliest songbirds back in the primordial early bird lineage, females also sang back then. And so this has caused us to take a step back and think about, well, we used to think that the main function of song was to attract females and defend your territory against other males. But here it is, in most species, females sing too. And why that is not really clear. There's some good research on this, some ideas, but we're just starting to get a grasp on this important question of why are females singing out there. And so I'm going to leave that as sort of a cliffhanger. And with that, switch it over to Cullen, who will start talking about some other aspects of using songs and acoustic recordings for conservation.
Thank you so much, Mike. And very, very cool presentation. And so I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about how we can use songs for conservation and maybe how you can get involved. And so here, if I can share my screen, I'm sharing sound. I'm going to assume that looks good, but let me know if it doesn't.
Looks good.
And so as Mike mentioned before, at the Macaulay Library, we have a global data set of media with about 50 million photos and about close to 2 million different sounds from around the world. And in combination with the eBird data set, which is 1.5 billion observations, which helps us understand what are the likely species for any location, we have an incredible resource for research and conservation efforts. And as he also mentioned before, you can explore this. You can explore this by location, by date. You can explore the media for a particular person. And we have a bunch of other filters that allow you to explore this research, the resource, and find media that could be useful for your own projects. And if you have questions about that, please feel free to get in touch. However, what's exciting is recent advances in data science have really allowed us to tap the potential of this aggregate data set for new uses, specifically advances in machine learning. Over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been working with Cornell Tech and Caltech and data scientists at Google to enable to use machine learning to be able to detect and identify birds within photos. And the result of this work has been that we've been able to create a model that can classify birds in photos that fits on an application that you can have on your phone. And so this is Merlin Bird ID, our bird identification app. And with Merlin now, because of this work that uses the entire collection of photos at the Macaulay Library, you can upload a photo and then combine with the photo and the location, assign the location, we can make a pretty good suggestion as to what species is in that photo. And so here's an example from Johannesburg. And now Merlin can identify 97% of the species found in South Africa. And so we have this pipeline using the collection of photos and machine learning to help people identify birds in photos. And we're now adapting that to sounds. And the first step is those spectrograms, is being able to see those sounds, as Mike was talking about. We take those sounds and we convert them basically into pictures of those sounds that allow us then to classify those pictures. And so once we have these spectrograms, we go in and we classify the different sounds within the spectrogram and use those images to train, using machine learning, train Merlin to identify sounds. And so here is an example. Now somebody can take Merlin out in nature. And in real time, get feedback as to what they're hearing. And we are extremely excited about this tool because we are already seeing this help people not just identify birds, but learn how to identify birds in the field and become better observers of birds. So currently, we've developed Merlin Sound ID for the majority of species in North America, where we're based, and also for Europe and the northern part of Africa. And we are working on expanding it. In Africa, we have quite a bit of work to do. Currently, in South Africa, a Merlin Sound ID can identify only 12% of species. However, to expand Merlin Sound ID in South Africa, we need more recordings. We need about 150 sound recordings for each species to have enough data to train Merlin to identify sounds. And currently, we only have enough data for about 15% of species in South Africa. But this is constantly growing, and as this grows, we'll be able to add more species to Sound ID. And this is important because by doing this, we're really taking this collective data set of people's observations, their photos, their sounds, and putting it into people's pockets to help them learn how to identify birds in the field. And currently, when you look at projects like the African Bird Atlas Project or the eBird dataset, you see a similar pattern that data is concentrated in certain areas, like in parts of Kenya or in places like Kruger National Park or Cape Town. But we also have many other areas where we have very little data, either because we don't have many people birding or because there's not many people there. By developing Merlin and tools like this, we hope to support and expand the community of observers so we can get more data, so we can understand some of the basics of where populations of birds are and how that's changing over time. Fundamental questions that are essential to conservation. However, we know that there's still a lot of areas that there just aren't that many people. And so one of the questions that a lot of people are asking is, can we use remote acoustic stations, microphones that we put out in nature, to just sit there and record to help us understand what birds are in that area? This is a really exciting kind of frontier that has the potential to really supplement data collected by people to help us understand where populations of birds are and how they're changing. But there are a number of challenges with this. One of those challenges is that these acoustic stations, they're good at detecting if species are there, but not as good at detecting how many were there. And so in this case, it might detect if there's a common grackle in the area, but it might not be able to tell you if it was one common grackle or hundreds of common grackles that were flying over. And so there are some really significant challenges in thinking about how we combine data from these acoustic stations and data collected by observers in the field. But this is something that people at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology are studying, as well as people at other institutions. And we're excited, I think optimistic about the potential for how we can combine these different kinds of data to help us understand how populations are changing. So getting started. We hope that this presentation has piqued your interest in bird sound and sound recording. A lot of people are interested in sound recording, but not sure how to get started. And we hope that we can kind of open the door and invite you to take some additional steps into sound. One of the most basic questions is about equipment and what gear to use. You know, some people use their cell phones, other people might use a shotgun microphone, or you might have seen this parabola. You know, I would say that phone is a great way to get started. For one, it's most likely what you have with you. It's something that fits in your pocket. It's a sound recorder and a microphone in one. And so it's very practical in that way. And you can use Merlin Sound ID as a recorder if you would like. You can record with Merlin Sound ID and save that recording and send it to yourself or share it with others. However, it's also challenging. You're going to have to get closer with this kind of microphone, and it's not very directional. And so when you do a sound recording, it's going to record not just the bird that you want to record, but all the birds in your area, as well as all the different kinds of sounds from any direction around you. And that's why people use something like a shotgun microphone. A shotgun microphone is a directional microphone. That tube, it allows for sounds to come in from the front, but deflects sounds coming from the other side. So when you're pointing it at a bird, you're getting a better recording of that bird singing than maybe the car noise off to the side, or your friend that's walking down the trail making noise to the other side, or a creek or whatnot. And so it helps you get a better quality recording of the bird that you're trying to record. Now, if you want to, the parabola, this really is the nicest kind of recording equipment that you can get. It tends to be more expensive, and it's larger, and so it's kind of more to carry around in the field. However, it is the most directional, and it will do the best job of recording the bird that you want to record, while kind of deflecting the sounds from other sources of sound in the area. And it does this because that parabolic dish, it reflects sounds from only one direction straight towards the microphone, whereas sounds coming in from other directions are going to bounce off and go different directions. And so a couple of tips to get started with sound recording is to really think about all the different sounds in your environment and try and minimize the other sounds to get the sound of the bird that you want to record. And that starts with you. It's amazing when you start sound recording, you really become aware of how much sound you make, whether it's your feet or just movement of clothes. You want to really try and be quiet. You want to think about other sources of sounds in the environment. For example, if you're recording a bird and there's a creek, you want to kind of try and position that creek to your back, so you're not pointing the microphone at the creek. You want to be recording away from that sound. Or better yet, be thinking record birds in an area that does not have much sound. It makes it much easier. And of course, get close to the bird. The closer you are to the bird, the louder that sound is going to be compared to everything else in the environment. A couple other tips that I think are really important is, one is to use an uncompressed file type like WAV. WAV is the standard file type that we recommend. Others, when they compress that sound, they're losing information that you can't get back. And the other is voice announcements. Now, voice announcements seem a little bit weird at first when you start doing them, but they're really important. What they are is, after you do a sound recording, you want to speak into the sound recording and say what bird you were recording and the conditions. Maybe it's behavior, what birds were in the background, where you were. And this is important because sometimes you might be listening to your sound files at a later date, and you might be thinking, what was I recording? What was I trying to do? Where was I? And so, you know, it's not an intuitive habit to make when you're sound recording, but it is extremely helpful for your future self that might want to be using these sound recordings, whether it's to upload to a collection like Macaulay or something else, or for whatever purpose you have for sound recording. Now, these are just a few tips. We don't have time to go into great detail. We could have multiple days of discussion about sound recording, equipment, and gear. But I want to point you to a couple of resources if you are interested in taking the next step. And one of those is our website. Macaulay Library has a lot of resources on equipment, on how to edit sounds, just to normalize and trim sounds, and other information that will help you get started with sound recording if this is something you're interested in. In addition, we have an online course called How to Record Bird Sounds. This is a very well put together course that was done by our partners at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology called Bird Academy. And this course does cost. And so if you go there, it costs $100. However, we have set up a code for members of BirdLife South Africa, ZA BirdLife. And with this code, you can take this course for free. You just need to remember ZA BirdLife, and that code will allow you to register for the course for free. And this course takes you through equipment, recording in the field, how to manage your files and edit sounds. And this is a very, very solid introduction to bird sounds that we're happy to invite you guys, anybody here to take. And that is the end of my presentation. And Christina, do we have time for questions?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks both to you and Mike. That was amazing. And I see lots of little emojis popping up with clapping hands and thumbs ups and hearts. So I think the audience thoroughly enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much. And also thank you for making the course free. That's amazing. I'm sure you'll have a lot of uptake on that. There's a lot of people who are interested in recording bird sounds, and hopefully you'll get a lot more data. So before we get on to some questions, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be back again for another episode in 2 weeks' time. And that episode will be all about OECMs, which are a new catchphrase in the conservation community, which is other effective area-based conservation measures. So it's about how we can try and expand our conservation efforts into areas that aren't formally protected. So my colleague at BirdLife South Africa, Giselle Morrison, will be joined by Sarah Hulley from Conservation Outcomes, and also Melissa Whitecross, who will be familiar to regular viewers as the original host of Conservation Conversations, who's now left BirdLife South Africa. Okay, great. So on to some questions. I know, Mike, you have another meeting coming up. It's still the middle of the day for you guys over there, even though it's evening for us here. So I'll ask some more sort of research-based questions first.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
So apologies, Kalani, I'm sure I've pronounced your name wrong, but your question is it possible to discern the meaning of a particular bird sound, like to understand the motive or message behind certain calls? Is there any ongoing research on it?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is yes and no. We certainly can categorize a lot of vocalizations or signals that birds give into broad categories. So, I was kind of loosely talking about song, but I was really talking about acoustic signals in general. For the most part, we classify bird vocalizations into songs and calls. Songs are usually used for territory defense and attracting mates. Calls tend to be a bit more specific to, for example, alarm calls, contact calls between flock mates, begging calls. So in those categories, we do know, okay, that's an alarm call. What we don't know, though, is the specific elements, like what those little elements mean. We know the whole thing means there's a predator around, but are they saying there's a predator above you, there's a predator below you, it's a big predator, it's a small predator? To a certain extent, we've started to decipher that. We know that chickadees here in North America give slightly different calls for more imminent threats, like a more dangerous predator. They give a slightly different call. But exactly how we can't decode it yet. We don't have a dictionary for going in and saying, this is the sentence that the bird's saying.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks. Hopefully we'll get there one day.
Someday, yeah, we're working on it.
So we have a question from Rob Simmons, who is an ornithologist here in South Africa, saying many duetting species are found in tropical areas where birds live longer than their counterparts in temperate areas. Thus, competition for territories is intense. So guess he's suggesting that females are singing and duetting with males to convey the same message that males are, for other females to stay away, that the male in this territory is taken.
Yeah, Rob's absolutely right. Singing by females and duetting is much more common in the tropics than it is in the temperate zone. And I think part of the reason we ignored female song for far too long is that most of the research was done in the temperate zone where not so many females sing. And now that people have really started to think more broadly about birds in different parts of the world, we realize, yeah, we are missing a big part of the puzzle. We also do know that at least part of the reason why females are singing and duetting with males is to defend a territory. You do find female song and duets it appears to be more common in species that hold territories year round rather than just for part of the season. But it also seems that's probably not the entire story. There are females that sing in species that don't seem to be very territorial. They sometimes sing and duet outside of the part of the year where they're defending a territory. Females will sing on their own without duetting with the male in many species. And so understanding better the context of when females are singing, as well as doing experiments to figure out what induces them and what the consequences of that singing are, that research is in its infancy. We need to do a lot more work. Rob's right. Part of the reason is territory defense, but there's other things going on.
Yeah, great, thanks. And it's good to see the research starting to focus on female birds, which, as you say, have been neglected not only in song, but in a lot of other areas as well.
Absolutely.
So we have a question from Eddie asking, why do birds mimic others? And this is something that's the bane of efforts trying to distinguish.
Yeah,
from
it's the bane for sound ID as well. But that's a great question. There's been a lot of work done on mimetic species. I wish I had a satisfying answer. I don't. Some of the species that do a lot of duetting also have very large repertoire. And there's some evidence in mockingbirds, for example, that females prefer males that sing more songs. And duetting may be an easy way for males to expand their repertoire size just by copying the sounds that they hear in their environment. Again, though, that's not entirely satisfying because it's not always the case that females seem to prefer males with large repertoires. It's another area where we just need a lot more research done.
Absolutely. Now we have a question more on the kind of mechanics of sound from Silvio, and I also saw a similar question from Hillary in the chat, is how do birds control the flow of air from their separate lungs? Do they have two diaphragms, or how do they control it going through the two branches?
Yeah, they don't. They aren't switching from one lung to the other. The air is coming in and out from both lungs, but they have muscular control over the two parts of the syrinx so that they can close the valves on one versus the other, just as like you and I can breathe in and out of our lungs without making sound, right? I'm doing it right now, right? But if I want to make a sound, subconsciously, my brain is controlling the muscles in my larynx to tighten those valves and create the sound. Birds can do the same thing. They just do it on both halves. And so the air is coming in and out from both lungs, and it's the valves that are opening or closing to create the sound on either side.
Great, thanks. Now another question from Rob, asking, do the wing snapping / vibrating species also have a syrinx?
They do. Yeah, they often sing. Yeah, they hummingbirds are another great group. They sing, they have vocalizations, but they also make songs with their wings and their tails. So it's just a different mechanism that can be employed.
Great, thanks. And now I think we'll just ask you one more question, then we'll give you a bit of a break. So from Peter Archdale, asking, is there any reason why some species have developed such complex songs? Do we know that?
Oh yeah, that's sort of the $64,000 question, or I guess with inflation it'd be more than that. But there are groups of birds that have really gone down the path of high complexity. So New World wrens are a great example. The mimids, the group that includes mockingbirds, and lyrebirds in Australia. They've all gone down this path of incredible complexity and often also very large repertoire size. Whereas others, you know, the chickadees here have basically one song, and that seems to serve their purposes just fine. We don't know. I should say, I don't know what sends a group of species down one path versus the other. And I would love to know the answer to that question. I hope somebody in this audience does that research project someday.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so Cullen, I think we'll direct some questions at you now. So I think Lynette Redman and also Christopher Hines have asked about Xenocanto and how that kind of relates to Macaulay, because I think in South Africa, a lot of people recording calls are posting them on Xenocanto. So Lynette said she had over 1,000 recordings, and whether there's any kind of interconnection between the two databases.
Yeah, that's a great question, and Xenocanto is similar to the Macaulay Library. It's a really useful collection of sounds, and one that, if you're interested in sounds, you can explore online. But it's a little bit different than the Macaulay Library. That question of, like, for Sound ID, if we've pulled Xenocanto sounds into Sound ID, we haven't, and that's partly because our whole pipeline is really set up to go from the sound recordist to the project, including regarding the license and other things that we haven't just gone out and grabbed sound recordings from other places. We would love if you contributed your sound recordings to the Macaulay Library, but as of yet, we haven't had an efficient way of kind of pulling, of pulling that in. So.
Great, yeah. Maybe this webinar will encourage people to also contribute their data to Macaulay. Mike, if you don't mind, before you go, just one more question that's come up from a few people. I've lost track of everyone, but this question is from Eddie, saying some birds maintain a song for many minutes, such as nightjars. How can they make the sound with air going in as well as air going out? How are they breathing and still singing?
Yeah. Part of the answer is microbreaths. They do little breaths. Part of the answer, I think, is also the air sacs. So the respiratory system of a bird is much more complex than ours. They also have air sacs in their bodies in addition to lungs. And I think they're able to, I feel this is outside my area of expertise, but I've read some things where, if I recall, it's sort of like the way a bagpipe player or a didgeridoo player can maintain a very long note by the circulatory breathing and somehow separating different pieces of the respiratory system apart from inhaling and exhaling. So I'm not exactly sure how birds do that, but through a combination of that and these micro breaths where they're doing little breaths in and out as they're singing, I think that's how they can really maintain a super long song.
Thanks very much. And please feel free to leave when you need to go for your other meeting.
I will in a couple of minutes, but before I go, I do want to say again, I love this. This is really fun. It's a great audience, and these are really good questions. So thanks very much for that.
No, thank you. This was amazing, and I know people have enjoyed it a lot. So thanks. Cullen, back to you. Robert Smith asks, do your recordings, or I guess possibly also the AI, make space for regional variations in birdsong, such as dialects?
Well, it does, but this is one of the reasons that we want to have so many recordings to train something like Sound ID, and so when we say that we want 150 recordings, that's because we really want a sampling across the geographic range of species, as well as other conditions too. There's a lot of variation in the different kinds of calls and sounds that bird individuals or individuals within a local population can make, as well as the background sounds in different environments and different gear that is really important for training something like Sound ID. But definitely not just for Sound ID, but for collections in general and for research, it's really important to have that geographic representation. And so that's why when somebody says, oh, you already have sounds, your recordings of the song of this species, that may be true, but we don't have examples from across the range in different seasons, in different conditions. And that's really important to have that variation represented in the collection for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I'm guessing the answer to Marty Jasper's question will kind of be similar about AI being able to distinguish when a bird is mimicking another bird call. I would guess if the more recordings you have, the better you'll be able to do that. But are you there yet?
Yes, I think that's a challenge. It's we don't always get it right either. So, it's an important note is that Merlin Sound ID is kind of like a friend that's really smart in some ways, but kind of dumb in others. It's like is really good at and can definitely be tricked. And mimics will trick. And so sometimes, for example, with a mockingbird, you might get that mockingbird, but you might also get a cardinal. And so it might trigger both of those things. And the Sound ID is like, I don't know, and so this is also why it's really important to use tools like this in the correct way and to be confirming those identifications and making sure that it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark Winslow asks, what is the best app to use for making a sonogram or a spectrogram, especially for a phone? Apologies, I'm not familiar with the Merlin. Does the app do that for you, or is there another app that can be used?
Yes, I think that there are other apps, but Merlin does. If you make a recording with Merlin Sound ID, it will create a spectrogram to allow you to visualize the sound. Not only that, but with Merlin, for any of the different species, we have sound recordings for almost all the species in South Africa. In each of those species accounts, you can look at their song and it will show you the spectrogram of the song while you're listening to it. And the purpose of that is that this is a useful way to help you learn those bird calls because it allows you to visualize the sound while you're listening to it.
Great, yeah. Now, Margaret has asked about something called Birdnet, which I'm not familiar with, but I Googled and it does seem to be part of the Cornell sort of family. You know about Birdnet because Margaret's found that she's unable to correct it when it gets it wrong, and has it seems to be getting more wrong more recently. So can you help Margaret at all?
Yeah, Birdnet is also at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's part of the Yang Center for Bioacoustics, and it is part of a larger project that supports acoustic monitoring. And they do a lot of work to support acoustic monitoring, not just of birds, but of all wildlife. They do stuff with insects. They've worked on some really cool projects for identifying human activity. For example, in some national parks in Africa, they've actually set up stations to identify gunshots to help identify potential sources of poaching. The difference between Birdnet and Merlin Sound ID is that Birdnet covers more species, but the training for it is not as refined. And so with Merlin Sound ID, which has a kind of like a little bit different of a different goal, which is to help people identify birds, is that we do a higher level of training and quality control in the sound ID, so that we have more confidence in the identifications for each individual species. And so these are just two different tools, and Birdnet has been a really cool project that's been part of an effort to kind of further, acoustic monitoring, and so.
Great, thanks. Just looking, do you still have time to answer a few more questions? Helen, I don't want to keep you
Sure,
too
and I'd also like to invite Ali, who's
yes.
one of the people that coordinates Merlin, in case some of these questions she might want to contribute to. Yeah,
if you both should be able to see the Q&A box, so if there's something in particular you would like to answer, please just let me know. So Hillary has asked whether there's an active online chat group of recordists using the Macaulay system. So I guess some forum that people can join.
We don't have one forum for sound recordists, and especially being a global platform, we oftentimes we have more local forums. But I think Hillary posed that question. We'd love to talk to you more about supporting the sound recordist community in Rwanda or other parts of Africa where Planet Birdsong works. I think somebody also asked a question about what to do when you don't know the identification of a sound. I think that was a great question. I mean, one of the things that if you know what kind of bird it was, you can upload it to a checklist like that. Like, let's say if you know that it was a lark, you can upload it to an eBird checklist as lark spot, or even like songbird spot, and then share it with the others to get feedback. We don't have a forum within eBird for that like you do with Xenocanto. Xenocanto does have like you can set up a discussion when you don't know what it is, and that might be something that's also an interesting point. But that's oftentimes what I'll do. If I don't know, I'll oftentimes upload it to the group level and then share it and ask. I might send it to Ali, and Ali is like, "Hey, Ali, do you know what this is?" Or, or sometimes you can get feedback from a eBird reviewer.
Great, thanks. And then Shashi has asked if there are any parallels to research in aquatic and marine sounds. The challenges would be quite different, but sorry, there might be some parallels. And I also see that Tess Gridley, who's a marine mammal researcher here in South Africa, has also said that she'll be in touch with regards to how the African bioacoustics community can help increase sound recordings from South Africa. So there are some bioacoustics people on here, but do you know if there are any parallels, as Shafi has asked?
So you said about doing acoustic monitoring for marine animals. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not an area where I'm an expert. However, the Lisa Yang Center here for bioacoustics has done some really cool work, not monitoring marine mammals and also fish. Fish make sounds. And so there's somebody here who's actually putting out microphones to detect fish in different areas that make vocalizations during different times of the year. And they have different ways of setting up microphones in the ocean that they can leave out to record sounds. And so while I'm not an expert, if somebody's interested, feel free to get in touch, and I can put you in touch with somebody more involved in that line of research.
Great, thanks for that offer. And I see, just going back to the other question about a forum, Hillary says planetbirdsong.org and is very active on Facebook. And Lynette Rudman also runs a Facebook page called Southern African Bird Calls. So thanks, Christopher, for alerting us to that. Just looking through the questions. Sylvia asks about the huge amount of data that is being gathered, and surely this is a wonderful occasion for determining some trends in birdsong to elucidate some of the questions that we had earlier using AI. So is there anything that you're particularly excited about in terms of what AI will be able to do and what questions it'll be able to answer in future?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And, you know, if you had asked me 10 years ago, it would have seemed like magic to be able to take out my phone and have it identify a bird that was singing right there. Or, you know, and so I think it's really exciting. We've already, I know that there's been some that have done some really cool projects, just, for example, mining the Macaulay Library for photos with eggs or photos with nests to try and find something for a particular use case. And I think that there's going to be quite a bit more of that. But I also think that there's going to be applications that we're not even thinking about yet. This is all kind of still quite new. And I think that that's really exciting to think about the potential applications. I mean, I think, like I mentioned before, just the idea that we could put microphones out there that could detect gunshots, that could help poachers or help parks identify areas where there's potential poaching, you know, is something that wasn't on my radar a year ago or 2 years ago. So,
yeah, one of the things I was doing on my field trip that I just got back on was part of a project that BirdLife is working on with NASA, and I think probably someone from Macaulay must be involved as well, which is called the Bioscapes project, where we're trying to link the input from NASA satellite sensors to the bird diversity on the ground. So I was putting out audio moths, which are small audio recorders that will be out for a week or so to record all the sounds in the area. And it's also, hopefully we'll get some amphibians as well as birds. I'm not quite sure yet how we're going to analyze all those bird calls, but hopefully some form of AI can be used for that. But that's also a super exciting application of using sound to monitor birds.
yeah, I think I think it's really exciting to think about how, you know, I think it's going to become a lot more accessible for research projects to be able to answer the questions they have, whether it's about a individual species or monitoring communities. I think that what we're going to see coming down the pipeline are a lot of really cool tools that are going to make monitoring efforts and research more accessible to more institutions and more individuals. And I think that's going to be a really, really positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I know people are quite scared of AI, but I think this is a very positive and useful application of that tool.
One thing that I'm excited about is when I can, I want to have a microphone in my backyard and just kind of get alerts anytime there's something interesting singing outside. And that seems like a mundane thing, but it'll be a really fun thing to have.
Yeah, it would be great. And also a way to get people who maybe wouldn't be excited about birds to kind of tap into that and become interested in birds as well. Because they are everywhere in people's backyards. And if they can more easily identify and access that, it's only going to be good for the birding community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's another kind of, there's a lot of people working on bird migration and coupling like radar with, you know, acoustic data that are recording birds calling as they fly over. And I think it's really exciting to see how, you know, that's being pushed forward with this kind of technology. And so, you know, imagine if you could, you know, already we have an application called Birdcast for North America, where you can kind of see predictions for how many birds are flying over in your location for any night with radar. But I think that with this acoustic data and the more we can do to automate the identification of these calls as birds fly over, it's only going to add to these kind of really cool tools.
Yeah, absolutely. There are still a few questions in the Q&A, but I'm conscious of time. So I think we're going to leave it there for now. If you are open to it, I can send you the remaining questions. And if you have the time, you and Mike and Ali, if you have the time to maybe answer some of them, that I'm sure people would appreciate that. But otherwise, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your amazing presentation. And thanks, Ali, for being available. And I've seen all your messages in the chat directing people to different resources. So thank you very much for that. I don't know if either of you have any last thoughts or anything that you want to share. Otherwise, I will close off.
Yeah, I would just say thank you for the opportunity. When we were in South Africa last fall, it was really exciting to see the great work that BirdLife South Africa is doing. And, we would love to find ways to support your important work in South Africa. Our emails are in the chat. If anybody wants to take a look, and feel free to get in touch. I think that we would be very interested in ideas for how we can work to help support the sound recording community in Africa, and so we look forward to being in touch.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's good to make this contact, and you guys are also doing amazing work, and it would be great to find some synergies. And if you're ever back in South Africa, please let us know, and it'd be great to meet you in person. Okay, well, thank you very much, and please convey our thanks to Mike as well. Your presentations were both very, very insightful and interesting, and I know people have learned a lot and enjoyed it. So from me, thank you very much, and please do join us again for the next episode in 2 weeks' time, as I said, about a new conservation initiative and other effective area-based conservation measures, or ECM. So with that, thank you very much, and thank you to all our viewers, and good night.